Welcome back, folks, to WrestleRant, where I, Graham G.S. Matthews, break down every pay-per-view I watch in the WWE Network. Of course, the entire month of September is dedicated and devoted to old Unforgiven pay-per-views as seen on the network. So if you already missed it, my edition of my review of the 1998 installment is up from this past Tuesday if you want to check that out before watching this one, or listen to this review rather. But Unforgiven 1999, which I thought wasn't a great show, but pretty good, or at least for the main matches down the card. There were some misses here and there, but the big matches did deliver in the end. So kicking off the show, we had Venis versus Steve Blackman. No real issue established between the two from what I could gather. It was a fine match. It wasn't bad. I didn't really care. I really liked Steve Blackman. The guy was a total badass. I mean, who didn't like Steve Blackman? And Val Venis had a fun gimmick with the pre-match promo and getting blown to the other side of the state after the hurricane or whatever it was. People get a kick out of that, but the match itself was nothing really of note. Val Venis won in the end, and that was pretty much it. Felt like something you would see, I don't know, before the show or, on the pre-show, the dark match heat, whatever. It just didn't really have any staying power, didn't really have any need to be on the card itself, other than an excuse just to get both guys in the show. So it wasn't bad per se, it just really didn't serve much of a purpose. So after that, for the European Championship, we had D'Lo Brown contending for the gold against Mark Henry, two former Nation of Domination teammates. After a brief alliance between the two, Mark Henry turned on D'Lo Brown, thus setting up this match. So it wasn't a wrestling classic by any means, but as anyone knows who listen to this review, who listen to these reviews, or reads my reviews or my articles or whatever, or knows me well, knows I'm a great, I'm a big sucker for a great story. And I mean, this wasn't a great story. It was pretty basic, one friend turning on the other, but at least it had a story. That's something that the previous match between Val Venis and Steve Blackman didn't have going forward. So that's what I appreciated about this match. But it was still fine for what it was. It was decent. D'Lo Brown, in the end, beating Mark Henry to win that European Championship. Mark Henry never actually won the European Championship. I thought that was interesting. I never knew that before. He was just awarded the title by Jeff Jarrett after Henry helped Jarrett beat Brown for that belt. So I thought that was interesting. But yeah, the crowd was into D'Lo Brown. It's just they never ended up really doing anything with him. I'm not saying he was world championship caliber, material or anything like that, but he was a nice, fun mid-card act, and they never really ended up doing much with him in the next few years before he got released. Whereas Mark Henry is still here to this day. They're still trying to push him, or at least, he's still with the company. That's, another rant for another day. But yeah, D'Lo Brown, I'm surprised they never ended up doing more with him, considering what he could get done in the ring as seen in this match. After that, for the Intercontinental Championship, Jeff Jarrett defending the gold against China. So this was in the midst of Jeff Jarrett's whole, anti-feminine campaign, anti-woman campaign, where he was just pretty much treating every woman that he was involved with like shit, including Deborah and later Miss Kitty, who he was aligned with at this period in time, and China took exception to that, and that's what kind of triggered this feud between the two. So it's a storyline that they would not get away with today. This is so Attitude Era-esque. Not saying it's bad, because people were into it and it made sense. It made Jeff Jarrett look like a complete asshole. So it was entertaining in that respect. And in the end, it was actually a pretty good match. I mean, China, for all the shit that people give her nowadays, and rightfully so in some respects for how crazy she's gone. Again, that's completely unrelated. But for this match, though, I thought it was pretty entertaining. Jeff Jarrett and China did a good job of holding my interest and the rest of the crowd's interest as well. Pretty well wrestled match, and they didn't give away the big finish with China winning the title. They would wait to do that until the Good Housekeeping match about, I think, the following pay-per-view at No Mercy. So this was not the blow-off in the feud. China would win the championship, but then they showed the replay of Jeff Jarrett beating up the referee or whatever it was, thus getting himself disqualified, or getting China disqualified, rather, and Jeff Jarrett still retains regardless. So that was the only minor gripe that I had with the match or the finish itself, was that, they never reused replays. WWE, even back then, with all their logic gaps, only calls upon the replays when they deem it necessary. Every other match, we never see a replay. It's only when they want to use it. So typical WWE for you, so that was kind of a logic gap. But other than that, though, I thought it was a very nice match, and it was nice furthering the feud. China didn't take the loss by pinfall, and Jeff Jarrett kept the belt, postponing the blow-off to the feud until No Mercy in the Good Housekeeping match, which would also be Jeff Jarrett's final match in WWF, I believe. So after that, we had, for just a standard tag team match, the Acolytes taking on the Dudley Boyz. An okay match. I kind of expected more considering both these teams are so legendary. APA, the Dudley Boyz, arguably one of the greatest tag teams of all time. Two of arguably the greatest tag teams of all time. The Acolytes and the Dudley Boyz. But this was Dudley Boyz. This was just when they came into the company, so they were not really all that over at all. You could kind of tell based on the reaction they got from this crowd, which was awful, by the way. I mean, people raving about the Attitude Era crowds, which is all, they were always great for the most part. For a majority of the shows, they were really good, and it's not like this was the beginning of the Attitude Era or the tail end. This was smack right in the middle of it in 1999. This crowd was awful. I'm pretty sure it was not the, par for the course in the Attitude Era, because a lot of the crowds were really good. It might have just been this one crowd in particular in North Carolina. It was just an awful crowd all night long, so they didn't really do this match any favors. The Acolytes ended up winning. That was that. Not too much, they didn't really have much chemistry with one another, the two teams. It's just kind of a mismatch, but yeah, I mean, I didn't hate it. It's just that it was kind of boring, and the crowd didn't really give two shits, and I didn't really, like I said, the crowd is kind of to blame for most of the show, but the Acolyte, it was a decent match, much like the opener. I just didn't really care about it too much because neither team was really over at this period in time. So after that, we hit Ivory versus Luna Vachon in a hardcore match for the WWF Women's Championship. This was more or less a brawl than it was an actual match. I mean, all of it took place backstage. The match, I think it was Luna who was on her way to the ring, or maybe it was Ivory. I don't know, whoever it was, which of the two. They were on their way to the ring. They were attacked by the other one, triggering this brawl backstage, and the match would all take place backstage. It was a complete mess. I mean, they were just throwing shit at each other against the wall, and then throwing the cooler, and some other stuff at each other, and I think someone else ended up getting involved. Or Tori, I think, got involved at one point, too. I mean, it wasn't a bad match. It was just all over the place, and I mean, I guess it's better than the fucking bikini contests and shit like that, and I mean, it's great for the male viewers like myself, but it's not wrestling. I'm not saying this was wrestling, but at least it was somewhat entertaining because it was more or less a fight than it was a match. And, the two had personal history. They had bad blood between each other, so it was logical to assume they would just go straight into it and not, have a technical wrestling match or a bikini contest, especially considering who was involved. I mean, Luna Vachon was not known for her looks. I mean, positively, she had a unique look. I mean, she was not the blonde bombshell that Sable was, but she had a very unique look. She was a badass of a woman. I'm surprised she's not already in the WWE Hall of Fame, personal opinion. But it was something out of the ordinary. I mean, it was by far, nothing close to being a great match, but I will give props where props are due. I will give credit where credit is due for this being something different from the women that we typically see during the Attitude Era. Oh, and Ivory successfully retained the title as well. So after that, for the WWF Tag Team titles, New Age Outlaws taking on Edge and Christian. The New Age Outlaws were the champions in this scenario. Unlike the previous tag team match in the show between the Acolytes and the Dudley Boyz, which I kind of described as dull earlier, I thought this match was very good. I thought it was a very, very good match between the two teams. This was kind of when Edge and Christian were coming into their own as their own kind of team. They had already broken away from the Brood, hence why the Hardy Boys got involved in the contest and cost them the match, and that would kind of, their feud was already kind of going on even before that, kind of setting up, I believe, the ladder tag team match for No Mercy, if my memory serves me correctly. So a lot of things happening that next pay-per-view at No Mercy the following month. But yeah, a very good match between the two teams, New Age Outlaws, unlike the year prior where the crowd wasn't really into them all that much at all. For as dead as this crowd was in the show, they were very much into the antics of the New Age Outlaws, and Edge and Christian were over as well. So they put forth a very good effort. I've always said the New Age Outlaws have never been the greatest in-ring workers. Like, I can't recall one great. This was a pretty good match. It was not great, but it was pretty good. I can't recall one great New Age Outlaws match, but that's not to say they were a bad team. Like I said earlier, one of the greatest teams, one of the greatest tandems of all time. Not just because they held so many tag team titles, because of their connection with the crowd and their staying power, their significance in history, their alliance with D-Generation X. So you don't have to be great workers in every single case in order to be a great team, or at least in my opinion. So the New Age Outlaws in that match successfully retained their WWF Tag Team titles. After that, Al Snow defending the Hardcore title against Big Boss Man in the infamous Kennel from Hell match, which was every bit as bad as you have heard, or as I've seen, or as I've read online, I'm sure. This was absolutely awful. This was terrible. It was like a Hell in a Cell match just within the ring. Surrounding the ring were the kennels, were the dogs. And they were just barking away in the match. They were just fucking all over the place, and they didn't really think this one through. Coincidentally enough, this was Vince Russo's, I believe, his final pay-per-view before he left the company for WCW. So to think that he came up with a match like this. I mean, Vince Russo has done some good things for wrestling, but he is also notorious for his awful match gimmicks, and this was, I'm sure, one of them. This was just terrible. Al Snow and Big Boss Man were fucking afraid out of their minds, and Al Snow, when he won the match, pretty much darted, and that was not a work. That was a total shoot when he darted that side of the steel cage, making sure he won. I can only imagine the instructions that they gave these guys. So just try to avoid getting bitten by the dogs around ringside that you can't really control because they're just animals, literally and figuratively. They're actually, they're beasts of dogs. And just the match was awful. I can't believe they actually went with this. And I mean, they also did the Hell in a Cell match. This was the same year they did the Hell in a Cell match with Taker at WrestleMania, and that match was also terrible. The worst Hell in a Cell match in WWE history by far. I mean, it's so bad that on the compilation of Hell in a Cell match DVD that came out back in 07, or I think it was 09 when it came out. No, and I think it was 2008, whatever it was. That was the one Hell in a Cell match in the 15-year history, 10-year history of the match. That was the only match that was excluded from the DVD because it was that bad. It was a terrible match, and it's not just because of the Big Boss Man getting hanged at the end of it, kind of, being mocked hanged. They could have just easily taken that off or edited it off. It had nothing to do with that. It's just the match was so bad, and this match was no better. And I mean, I feel bad for Big Boss Man because the guy was not put in the best of situations. So a terrible match and easily one of the worst of the year, and that goes without saying. After that, just a standard singles match between X-Pac and Chris Jericho, who had Curtis Hughes in his corner. A pretty good match between kind of two, a very cruiserweight style contest. Jericho is not doing much at this period in time. I mean, he talks about it in his DVD, the one that was most recently released, the Road to Jericho DVD, where X-Pac kind of served as his mentor for a couple years. I mean, Jericho had already been in the business for 10, 15 years at this point, but I believe anyway, or at least close to 10 years, or something along those lines. Maybe close to 10 years. I think he debuted in 1990, I want to say, because he's coming up on his 25th anniversary. Anyway, he said in the DVD that X-Pac was kind of a mentor to him, and not voluntarily. I mean, they just kind of forced X-Pac upon him, which is not a bad thing, but the guy, I mean, X-Pac has probably had the same amount of experience in the business as Jericho did, so it didn't really make much sense. But when he first came into the company, they would assign X-Pac to help Jericho produce his matches and kind of as his agent, so to speak, and that was kind of his role, his association with Jericho when he first came into the company. So they did have that kind of history. They didn't have too many tremendous matches. I remember watching in that DVD a steel cage match they had. I believe that happened on Raw. Even better than this one. This was still a pretty good match. They didn't have like a classic series of matches that Jericho did with like Mysterio and Shawn Michaels and all these others. They had some pretty good matches, nothing too memorable, but they did have some decent chemistry with one another, which is to be expected when you have as many matches as they did against each other in the latter half of 1999. But it was a good match, though, in the end, Jericho getting himself disqualified after Curtis Hughes got involved. And originally the match was supposed to be Jericho and Ken Shamrock, but he pulled out. I think he left the company by that point, and X-Pac was served. He served as his replacement, kind of triggering a feud between the two for that fall, as I mentioned. But still a pretty good match, and it was well served right before the main event. So speaking of such, getting to the main event, a six-pack challenge for the WWF Championship, the vacant WWE title, I might add, with Stone Cold Steve Austin serving as the special outside enforcer, the combatants included Big Show, Mankind, Kane, the British Bulldog, The Rock, and the defending champion, Triple H. Or he was not the defending champion, he was the champion before this match. I just kind of go back a little bit. I'm sure most of you already kind of know the history behind it, but in short, Triple H had been champion after winning the belt from Mankind on the Raw after SummerSlam, which I talked about in my SummerSlam 1999 review. Not a good match. I mean, it was not horrendous, but it was not a good match. The main event of SummerSlam that year between Austin H and Mankind. And they put the belt right back on Triple H, or his first title win, the very next night on Raw anyway, so it kind of felt pointless. But anyway, though, so a couple weeks after that, Vince beats him with help of Stone Cold on an episode of SmackDown. So Vince is champion, of course, being the commissioner or the chairman, whatever. He has to vacate the title or voluntarily vacates it, and thus leading us to this matchup. So Triple H had his rematch. Rock was in the title chase for a while. Mankind was in the title chase going back to SummerSlam. Kane and Big Show were just kind of thrown in there, and the British Bulldog also had history with The Rock from like SmackDown a couple weeks earlier. So he kind of felt like the odd one out, the British Bulldog. I mean, you look at all these, you think of, the biggest stars in the Attitude Era, and you think of Triple H, Rock, Mankind, Big Show, Kane, Stone Cold Steve Austin, who was not directly involved in this match. He was not a participant, but he was the outside enforcer. And then you have British Bulldog, which is not a bad thing. I mean, I think his work before he came back to the company, like in the early 1990s, it was a lot better than his work during the Attitude Era, in my personal opinion anyway, just from what I've seen on pay-per-views and whatever. It's not to say he was bad, though. He held his own in this match, and I thought this was easily the best match in the entire show. Very entertaining six-way. And when you have matches like this, whether it be triple threats, fatal four-ways, scramble matches even, six-pack challenges, they do tend to be either hits or misses. They can either be extremely entertaining or absolute train wrecks. Thankfully, this one fell in the former category. I thought it was very good. All six guys had amazing chemistry with one another, so there was never really a dull moment. Just a lot of chaos going on, which, I've gone on the record in saying in the past, the Attitude Era is not my favorite era in WWE history. That would be reserved for the 02 to 05 era, the Ruthless Aggression Era, as it has been called in the past. That is my favorite era in wrestling. I'm not one of those people that will romanticize about the Attitude Era, but I'm also not one of those people that will completely shit on the Attitude Era either. So that being said, as I've talked about in my past reviews for SummerSlam, Judgment Day, Backlash, WrestleMania, all the pay-per-views that I've covered from the Attitude Era in the past year, I've talked about how, the chaos and the overbooking of some finishes did, tend to get overbooked at times and kind of be too chaotic and just too chaotic for my liking. But there's also some other times when all the interference and the overbooking can be well done, and it can be entertaining when it's not all over the show. That's exactly what the case was with this match. This show was not, filled with overbooking. Most of the matches, even if they did have dirty finishes, it was because the heel cheated. It wasn't because 10 people interfered, like the year before at Unforgiven 1998, which I didn't think was a good show at all. There was a lot of interference in every single match, and it was I didn't like it. I didn't enjoy it. This match was one of the few matches on the show that had a lot of interference involved, and rightfully so. Vince got involved, and many others as well. Stone Cold, of course, kind of opening up a can of whoop ass on many of the participants at ringside. And then in the end, British Bulldog was about to hit Triple H with a steel chair as he hit the pedigree on... Who did he be? I think it was Rock. I can't recall exactly, but anyway, after Triple H hit the pedigree, I'm pretty sure it was Rock. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Rock because he was about to win the title before British Bulldog got involved. So Austin lays a stunner on Bulldog. He's out of the ring. Triple H covers Rock for the win, and he regains the WWF Championship. So the outcome of the match, I liked it. Triple H was kind of coming into his own as a single star at this period in time. He needed the title back. To take it off him in the first place was kind of dumb, but it did set up this awesome six-man, so I can't really complain. But that said, what was the other thing I was going to say? That just all the chaos, as I mentioned, was very entertaining. It played a part in the finish, and I thought it was very good. I thought the outcome was now I remember what I was going to say. No, although the outcome was the right decision, it kind of fell flat with the viewers, and it's not like people popped when they saw 1, 2. Not everyone counted along. Not partially because this crowd was so terrible, like I mentioned, but also partially because they didn't think that'd actually be the finish, and they probably wanted, The Rock to win or him to kick out or whatever. He didn't. Triple H is champion. And that's not to say that should not be a reflection on how quote unquote poor the finish in the match was. I thought the right person went over. I thought it was a very entertaining match, and like I said earlier, easily the best match in the entire show. So a very good way of going off the broadcast. So on the whole, I was kind of sour on the pay-per-view in the first hour or so because it was not the greatest. The Attitude Era was not known for its amazing in-ring ability, like it's in-ring, technical wrestling anyway, unlike today or later eras or whatever, proceeding eras anyway. But still, we had some really, really good matches on the show. Not every match was great. There were some kind of duds. That's what kind of prevents this show from being great, in my opinion, was the Kennel from Hell match, which was awful. The Acolytes and Dudley Boyz was just kind of lame. Not terrible, just kind of lame. D'Lo Brown and Henry, fun for what it was. Val Venis and Steve Blackman was kind of a waste. And then Ivory and Vachon was, like I said, unique, not good, not great, but it was unique. It had something going for it. But the matches that did deliver made this show what it was, made it a very good show, including the main event, X-Pac and Jericho, which I thought was good, and the New Age Outlaws and Edge and Christian match. So the final three of the final four matches I thought were excellent. The Al Snow and Big Bossman match was just terrible, terrible feud, terrible match. All around awful, but thankfully the rest of the show held up. The undercard was okay, making this a good to very good show in my opinion. So what I recommend you watch it back on the WWE Network. It's up for debate. If you don't watch it, you're not really missing too much, but if there is one match from the show that you should watch, it's easily the main event. I thought it was a very, very good match, and it did set up some great matches in the next couple months, including Triple H versus Stone Cold Steve Austin for the WWF title and an Anything Goes match at No Mercy. So a lot of stuff on this show set up No Mercy, so it also kind of served that purpose well as well. It also set up, planted the seeds for some epic and very memorable matches for the following pay-per-view. So anyway, guys, I enjoyed the show. Hopefully you do as well if you watch it back on the network. Hopefully you enjoyed this review. But in the meantime, in the between time, you guys can catch me on Twitter at WrestleRant, on Facebook at facebook.com/graham.gsm.matthews. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. All support is greatly appreciated. I'm going to try to get up my review of Unforgiven 2000 tomorrow. If I don't, it should be up on Tuesday. I have enough open slots, later on in the month. So if we miss tomorrow, then it's fine. I'm not completely off track. But yeah, like I said earlier, though, the entire month, will be dedicated to Unforgiven, the entire month. And then next month, we're moving to No Mercy. So I'm looking forward to reviewing those pay-per-views as well before we move into Survivor Series in the fall and some other pay-per-views and episodes of Raw and whatnot going into WrestleMania season, Royal Rumble, and going into the new year. So that's kind of it's going to cap off our year in 2015. That's what's kind of on the pike in the next couple months. So with all that being said, guys, like I said earlier, hopefully you enjoyed this review. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening per usual. I am Graham GSM Matthews, and I'll catch you guys down the road.